Hello everyone, it's VonRed1 here, and today I'm going to make a video about some loot ideas that came to my head in under an hour regarding Marvel's Avengers. This is a game that has a lot of problems, let's be honest. One of them being the loot. The exotic loot doesn't really have anything that's exotic about it. So I spent, again, under an hour thinking of some cool loot ideas for the game, so I came up with 5 per character. Quick disclaimer, a lot of these probably aren't balanced, but these are just quick concepts that came to my head. A lot of them, though, I could definitely see working in the game and not being overly broken. Plus, they could put in more measures and countermeasures to make sure that it's balanced, but still very powerful and actually can be qualified as exotic, meaning good. So without further ado, let's start over with the list, and I'm going to start with my main character in the game, Iron Man. So for Iron Man, I thought of five examples of loot, and I decided to take some from the comics. So the first one would be Repulsor Spread. This is a perk that will let you lock on to up to 3 enemies at once, meaning as you're charging the repulsor, just move the cursor over their heads, and then you can fire 3 shots out of the one repulsor on blast, and then that would do up to 3 times damage if you have 3 people locked on, double damage for 2 people, and just slightly stronger than the average repulsor attack with just 1 person. This can also drain half the intrinsic bar to be balanced. This is something that was actually in the comics. I believe Bleeding Edge, maybe even the suits before that, could do this. It looked like an orb coming out of his hand, and then I believe it was far more than 3, but he could shoot independent repulsor beams from one hand. I got cool artwork of that. I don't know if I can find it for this video, but that was a cool thing he could do in the comics. Another thing for Iron Man could be a smart unibeam, where critical hits with the unibeam slow the rate at which the heroic bar drains, and also have it where 10 critical hits in a row add an extra second to the unibeam's duration. So imagine this for bosses being really good. You can have prolonged unibeam usage, especially if you have like the Omega Beam where you use the unibeam and your 3 hands. Could be very powerful because that one gets stronger the longer it's on a single target. So like imagine using that against the Super Adaptoid, that would just melt. Another exotic, and this one's kind of just fan servicey, heroic pose, where if you fly up into the sky as Iron Man, just cut the boosters and fall. When he hits the ground, he does the iconic pose where he has his one fist on the ground, and then that can put out a high damage stun shockwave to enemies nearby. Again, high damage, high stun. People could then go in and finish up the stun meter and do some takedowns, or it could just do a lot of damage and people can capitalize on that and finish off enemies faster. Another exotic could be Stark Payload, and these are all perks, by the way, if I didn't clarify. Stark Payload, when holding the missile button down, instead of it doing the small missiles from his gauntlet, it just opens up his shoulder mounted missiles, and kind of like the scene in the first Avengers when he was flying up to the portal and he had the missiles come out and they did a lot of damage. Have that be the new attack when you hold down on PlayStation the triangle button, and have it do high damage while applying the status effect. And again, it can drain a lot of the intrinsic bar, but again deals high damage and high stun. And then my last one for Iron Man, Orbital Laser, where if you land 30 critical hits in a row with the laser, or at least land 30 critical hits in a very quick time, it summons the Stark Orbital Weapon System, and then that can drop a barrage of lasers on the battlefield in front of you. Will look kind of like the Harbinger in Ratchet Deadlocked if you've played that game, and it could just cause very high damage, and it will look awesome, and it would kind of fit the character, because I honestly do believe Iron Man would have like a satellite in orbit that can just drop lasers down on enemies. So that would be a cool thing to show, and of course they'd have to balance it, maybe put in a time limit. You can only do it once after you use it you have a 5-minute countdown, kind of like the major artifacts do, so they could do that. So that's Iron Man, and next up I'm going to do Captain America. For Captain America, I also have 5, so we have 3's a crowd, and this one would let you perform the shield kickback up to 3 times. That's probably one of the most used moves in the game. When you do the power throw, and then if you hit R2 as it's coming back, he'll kick it back out. So this exotic would allow you to kick it back up to 3 times, with the damage increasing for each kick, so that on the third kickback it does very high damage, and maybe even have a camera zoom in as he performs the third kick. And then also this will let you kick back the shield after using the assault heroic. The second one would be Shielded Avenger, and I believe you can already block any attack in the game with a certain perk, but this one would let you block and counter any attack at all with the cost of your full intrinsic bar, and then the counter, if it lands on an enemy, can cause a devastating amount of damage, pretty much taking what would have normally been a killing blow from some enemies, but turning it back on them. So that could be a very powerful tool to use if you're in a tight spot, you can't dodge out of the way, or you messed up, so you just quickly hit R2 and there you go, you've lost your intrinsic bar, but you've just done a devastating amount of damage on the enemy. Another one could be kinetic storage, where standard range attacks build up energy on the shield, and you can see it build up by glowing red or another color. And then once you hit, like, say 3 standard range attacks, you do the charged range attack, and it does a massive devastating shockwave on the first 3 hits after you throw it. And this will be visible, and it will cause, again, a high damage stun shockwaves that cause high damage and stun, and then they'll even affect other people not being hit yet, or if they're not even hit at all with the initial 3. So that could be a very powerful way to use the shield. Multitasker, perform takedowns on up to 3 enemies at once. This is a thing that I kind of want them to just make common in general for every character, but if it had to be for one character specifically, Cap would probably be the best option because of how the shield works. So say you could have 3 enemies stunned, he throws the shield at all 3, it bounces off, then he throws it again on return at the 2 in the back and does a kick on the 1 in the front. Then after the kick, the shield comes back to his hand. And that could be an example of just a takedown he does on 3 enemies at once. Also maybe have one for just 2. But yeah, I feel every character should have a multiple takedown animation, but if one character had to get one, Cap will make the most sense. And then my final one for Captain America would be Charging Star, where when you do the shield charge attack, as he runs through, enemies that get hit by the shield get hit with a shield payload, so they're left suspended up in the air, and they're also susceptible to double damage. The intrinsic bar would drain faster, but that's a fine trade-off, so you could charge through enemies, turn around, throw your shield at them, do a kickback, and then you're doing way more damage than if you were to just do the shield throw in general. So that's my ideas for loot for Captain America. Next up is Black Widow. For Black Widow, 5 again, first one being Shock and Awe. So with this one, a headshot final blow would put a shock effect on nearby enemies, and also because they're in shock, it would drastically reduce their movement, speed, and accuracy. This could cause a visible effect on nearby enemies, where they might freak out at first after the initial headshot final blow, and then they just, again, their accuracy goes down, their movement becomes a little slower in shock, and again applies the shock status to them. That would be a cool thing for Widow, because then you could go in with the heavy attacks, and it would also just cause extra damage because you're not getting hit, they're in a shock status, so that automatically makes every attack critical. And then other heroes on the team could also benefit from that. My second one is, watch this, while invisible, you can instantly perform a takedown on any enemy in exchange for just 3 seconds off your invisibility timer. So as soon as you activate it, even if an enemy is at full health, hasn't even been attacked yet, no stun damage, you can still go ahead and just do a takedown on them, but again, it takes away 3 seconds. And there's perks where you can extend like your invisibility timer, so this could be a great piece for people that want to just stay invisible and do maximum damage, because a takedown will do high damage most of the time if you have like high heroic. So this will be a great piece of exotic gear for Widow. Another one, High Caliber. This will replace the heavy pistol with a heavy assault rifle, and it will have the same bullets, but they will fire a little bit faster, be automatic, so you just hold down R2, and provide the same or better accuracy, and keep the same status effect if you have a piece of loot that does that. But this will be much better because the current one you have to hold it and keep firing, or if you want to charge it up. So here you just replace it with an auto fire. That could probably make some people's playstyle better, because If you want full auto, you have to use the submachine guns, and they're not the most accurate things, but here you'd have an auto weapon with full accuracy. Will be a cool option, maybe even have more variants in the future. Another piece of gear would be Widow's Strike, and this would be where if you use Widow's Bite in its original formation where it shoots out the electric dart, when it ends, there's a nuke effect on the screen that sends the static or shock effect to everyone on screen. And that would be a cool way to just apply shock to everyone around you without having to use like Iron Man's Overcharge, for example. And then my last one is Disarmed. The grapple will now disarm enemies, leaving them defenseless. Kind of like in the Spider-Man PS4 game, how you could use your webs to disarm enemies. Give that ability to Widow, but with her grapple. And then they could balance this by either having it require half of the intrinsic bar, or just they'll think of a way. They could think of a way to balance it. I thought of these in under an hour. But yeah, that's my idea for Widow. Next up is Thor. For Thor, I have the 9 Realms Express, where when you use the Bifrost, it not only pulls Thor in with it, but also all nearby enemies, which take a high status damage while they're inside. Then when Thor finally returns with the final blow of the ultimate, they get spit back out, and they're highly damaged, maybe even stunned, and they have a status effect or two applied to them. This will be a cool visual to see as it pulls in all the nearby enemies, then spits them out at the end of the special. And it would be a cool way to do crowd control just by using the ultimate before you even deliver what's the main point of using it, the high damage ending of it. For next, I have the Uru Crater, and this would be where power ranged attacks cause massive stun damage shockwaves on impacts. So you could throw this, for example, and if there's a line of enemies, it'll keep going. It'll cause damage to each enemy it hits. It won't necessarily pin, but it just does high damage. And it won't stop until it either hits the ground or hits a solid wall. And this will be just a fun attack to use, as you could see the impact, you could see the stun damage. Even if someone's not directly hit with it, the shockwave could still hurt them and do high damage or give them a lot of stun buildup. So that would be a cool move to use, and it would add more use to the charge throw. Another one would be Odin's Blessing, and with this one, if you use the support heroic, all projectiles that come near you get zapped and they get sent back to sender with the shock effect applied. So this will be a great way to negate all projectiles coming towards you and also do damage while not even necessarily attacking. You just stand there with the support heroic and it would do its job for you if you're fighting people with a lot of projectiles. Even a turret, if you were to use it and the turret shoots at you, all those projectiles would go back to the turret would just take itself out. Another one would be Electrifying Senses. God Blast now leaves enemies stunned and constantly being struck by lightning for 3 seconds after the attack ends. So currently with God Blast, you can do the thing where it makes the tornado, and that's a good way of crowd control temporarily. It just holds them in place. This one would work in the opposite. Once you've already done it, after you've done the killing blow of the God Blast, it would keep them getting struck by lightning for 3 seconds. Now this would apply shock damage, obviously, and it would also give you a chance to deal double damage in addition to the crit damage you get from the shock effect. So I could see that being great for a combo with Iron Man's missiles if you have a warm status effect. And then for the final one for Thor, Asgardian Might, and here would be when you're not using Mjolnir and you're using hand-to-hand combat, you'll deal triple damage, but your maximum willpower gets reduced to half and will slowly drain over time. Until critical, then it will stop and just stay there until you either heal or you just pick up Mjolnir again. This will be a good one to give people more options for Thor, because there's not really a point in using hand-to-hand combat in the game right now. It's kind of just like they're like a cool novelty, but you want to use Mjolnir, so this will give people an excuse to actually not use Mjolnir. You'll have higher damage, but again, you won't have like the lightning, or you won't have the higher willpower you normally do, so it'll be a risk versus reward playstyle, but some people will enjoy that, and at least some people will try to toy around with it. So next up is Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel is one of the characters that I had to actually sit here and think about for a while, but I finally came up with 5 examples of exotic loot. So the first one would be Go Team, and this would be when you use the support heroic, it'll provide an invincibility buff for 10 seconds to all the team members. Pretty self-explanatory. This would be a very cool way to add support by giving them heals and invincibility for 10 seconds. The next one would be Embiggened Avenger. Your ultimate heroic now makes you invincible, so the heroic will now only last 10 seconds by default. And again, you could extend that with other perks or things in the skill tree. But yeah, now you're invincible while you're embiggened will be very useful, and then you could take advantage of that in, say, the Omega level threat where everything's trying to kill you. So that would be 10 seconds of safety and a chance to cause high damage up close. Insanely Inhuman. Now all polymorph attacks are critical. So for example, the attack where you hold triangle in the air and she does the punches down or up depending on who you're locking onto, that one would now guarantee critical hits for every attack. So if you have for example a status effect on that as well, now you're doing even more damage. So that would be a useful thing to use, and they could probably balance that by having it slightly use the intrinsic bar, but I don't know, they might not even need to do that since it's exotic gear after all. Mighty Hands is the next one. Now all power attacks use the intrinsic meter but deal double damage. So now, for example, again with the attack where you hold triangle, you know what, forget what I just said about the previous one using the intrinsic. So with this one, it would use intrinsic, but now you're dealing guaranteed double damage before it's even a critical hit. So now if you use this plus a critical hit, you're doing even more damage. So this would be the one. And then also the final blows of all power attacks can cause a high damage stun, devastating shockwave. So that would make this one far more useful than the last one, but it would come at the cost of your intrinsic meter. So that would give you a choice of, do I want this one where all my polymorph attacks are critical, or do I want this one where all my power attacks deal double damage and then some because of status effects, but I lose my intrinsic. So then you have the last one for Miss Marvel, Put 'em Up, and this one would basically make her ranged attacks much better. Now she'll use both hands to punch, and you can just hold down R2 if you want, and it'll just be a automatic punching from both hands. This could do high DPS range damage for Miss Marvel. This would honestly change her character. You could actually question making a full ranged build for her with this exotic. You could just keep punching, not even needing to keep pushing R1, just hold it down. It wouldn't drain intrinsic. You could have the status effect on the punches, and this would just be this would be a very good exotic. I'm actually surprised they haven't already made something like this. But yeah, that's my 5 for Miss Marvel. She was the hardest one to come up with ideas for. Next up is Hulk. For Hulk, I had a few fun ideas. So again, 5 pieces of exotic gear, perks. So for one, we have Shatter Bomb, and here is where when you pick up a heavy piece of debris, if you hold the power button to slam it to the ground, it'll cause a high damage shockwave, and it'll also send out debris in a large area that causes high stun damage. So whoever you're next to when you use this will take high damage. Whoever's far away will get stun damage. So this could be a cool way to do 2 effects at once with a varying degree of success. Then we have now a Mad. Damage against Hulk adds to his power limit. So the more damage you take in a certain amount of time, you can reach up to triple damage. So here's an example of where if you want, you could intentionally let Hulk get hurt, and then once there'll be some kind of visible notification on screen, your damage will increase and it can go up to triple damage for a short while, maybe like 10-15 seconds. And this will be a cool way of, the more you make Hulk mad, the stronger he gets. This will be a good way to show that, because the game currently does not have a way to show that, and that's one of Hulk's most identifiable traits. You make him mad, he gets stronger, and the game doesn't have a way to show that. This is one way they could show that. The next piece of exotic gear I have is World Breaker, where at a full rage bar, if you do a heavy power attack, you'll activate a World Breaker mode. In this mode, Hulk will glow a green-yellow, and he'll emit it almost like high gamma radiation. It'll cause high damage and stun to anyone just around him without even needing to attack, and damage is tripled in this state, and it'll last for 15 seconds. This is definitely inspired by the World Breaker Hulk, where that's probably the most powerful form of Hulk in the comics. He's legitimately so radioactive. Him just stepping on the earth was causing eruptions and stuff. It was a crazy powerful version of Hulk. Seeing that in the game would be awesome. The next gear I have is Feel the Power. takedowns will now cause a high damage / stun shockwave that affects nearby enemies. So I kind of wish the game already had this as well for other characters, but now when you use a takedown with Hulk, it'll do a visible shockwave attack. So this way, when you're doing it on one person, you can still damage multiple while also having the invincibility that comes with takedowns. And then the last one for Hulk would be Tectonic Might, where critical melee attacks have a high chance to cause an earthquake, causing moderate damage to all enemies and high stun damage to all enemies. Again, kind of taken from Worldbreaker, but not within the same thing. But yeah, critical melees could cause an earthquake, causing the screen to shake, enemies getting noticeably higher stun meters. This will be a fun one to use because then your team could go in and just clean up everything. So that would be a fun one to use. Could cause a lot of trouble with the stun. And next up we have Kate Bishop. For Kate Bishop, I also kind of had a little bit of a hard time, but I came up with some cool ideas. The first one being left you a present. Teleporting will leave a high damage stun bomb at the location you left. It'll use more intrinsic energy, but it'll cause high damage and stun. This would be a cool way because the R2 circle teleportation is a cool way to navigate. It would be cool to implement that into combat in a way of leaving a bomb where you were. So I could see that being a cool thing. That's one, again, I'm kind of surprised there isn't already loot doing that in the game. Next up is Detonation Arrow. The Razor Arrow will plant an explosive on every other arrow, followed by a Detonation Arrow. This can cause instant detonation if you just use 2 arrows in a row on the same enemy, or you could stack it to where you shoot the enemy once, aim up or somewhere else, fire the second. And if you keep doing that and alternating, you could then shoot the detonation arrow and it would set off 5 of them at once, causing insane damage very quickly. And it would do a damage multiplier compared to how many you have stuck inside the enemy. I kind of stole this idea from The Division 2. There was a pulse rifle called the Nemesis that does something similar to this, but I do think it would be a cool thing to have in this game for either Kate or Hawkeye or both. So that's one idea, Detonation Arrow. Next up we have Locked On. 10 critical hits in a row will give you 10 seconds of auto aim that cause double damage and critical damage. Hawkeye kind of has this as well, where if you do, I forget how you activate it, but it'll lock on and all of his attacks become critical or aim for the head. That would be a cool thing to have for Kate as well, and if it has to be an exotic gear perk, okay, fine, but I believe she should have that as well since she's Hawkeye's protege, so makes sense to have it. Next up we have Personal Reminder. Kate's melee attacks induce a bleed status that slowly drains their health after 3 consecutive hits. Enemies will also take higher stun damage when they're in the bleed state. Kind of surprised there's no bleed state in the game. A lot of games like this have something like that. The game only has like 6 status effects, so they should do more kinds of effects. Doesn't have to be status, but bleed will probably count as a good status effect, especially with Black Panther coming in the game soon. He should be able to induce something like that as well. So yeah, that's Personal Reminder. And then last up for Kate, we have Double Teamed, and this one will basically let Kate's duplicate support heroic move around and fight more like her. So this time the duplicate hologram would actually move around, use normal weapons or use the normal bow and arrow attacks, maybe even do melee attacks. Have it basically become when you use Kate as an AI companion, but have that be the support heroic. And then if you're within range of the duplicate, you deal double damage as well. This is another one, again, it's kind of surprised it's not in the game yet, but yeah, that's something that they could easily probably add. So yeah, that's 5 for Kate Bishop. Next up and last is Hawkeye. Hawkeye was another one that was kind of hard to come up with gear for, but I think I did a good job. First up we have Pain, No Gain. Support heroic now provides double damage to those inside instead of healing. So another one of those risk versus reward play styles. A lot of people use Hawkeye as kind of another form of medic character with that support heroic. So with this one instead, it would be able to give a damage boost. So again, you can choose if you want that or if you want the healing one. Adds options, adds different play styles, so that's a good thing. Next up is Bonus Payload. Critical shots have a chance of exploding and sending many arrows to nearby enemies' weak spots. Kind of like in the Avengers when he shot the one Chitauri and then the arrow he shot out more at them. have a move like that based off the movie again would be a cool thing to have in the game and could be a good form of crowd control to some extent. Next up we have Burrow Arrow, and with this one the pulsar arrows now burrow into the ground and target nearby enemies, causing moderate damage and high stun damage. So this one would be cool because you don't need to be precise. Normally with the pulsar it has a longer charge up time, so with this one you can almost just fire it instantly into the ground and it'll find the nearest enemy and just cause high stun damage and moderate damage. So this will be a good way of crowd control as well. You just fire off say 6 pulsar arrows into the ground, switch back to the razor arrow, fire at someone else farther away, and then you're doing damage to up to 7 people at once in theory. Next up we have Cluster Bomb, and cluster arrows now all become high damage explosives. Kind of like in other forms of media where he shoots the arrows that go out, fly to the ground, they either blow up causing damage or do smoke, and here it will be high damage. And again, you could aim this up, it will give you the arc, kind of like when you have Hulk throwing debris. And you could do this as crowd control as well. Aim up in the sky, have them fall down on enemies while causing explosive damage. That'd be cool to see, and it would be a cool feature to have for Hawkeye. And my last one for Hawkeye would be Heads Up. Razor arrows can now heal teammates. Delivers 10 willpower to allies or 20% willpower with a charge shot. So this would be a good way to provide more specific healing to your team than just having that giant healing circle to step in. Here you could actually heal teammates far away from you. So imagine like an Iron Man is flying around, he's low on health, you just shoot a few razor arrows at him, now he's back to full health. This is another one I'm kind of surprised it's not in the game, because this would be a very good piece of gear to get. This would be something you could have whole team structures around, where Hawkeye is the medic and he doesn't even need to use the support heroic to do it anymore. So then he could, in theory, use the pain no gain support heroic I mentioned earlier and give people double damage if they're nearby, but then when they go off, he can still be the healer without having to be right next to them. So again, I'm surprised no other character in the game has something like that. Maybe even Kate could have something like that. But yeah, that's it for Hawkeye. And with that, we're at the end of the video. Here, these again were just 5 ideas for loot exotic perks for each character in the game. I didn't do Black Panther because we haven't seen the war table yet showing his gameplay, and I'm hoping Crystal Dynamics has good loot for Black Panther come release. Obviously it'll take a while to get to a high enough level to get the exotic gear, but still I hope they have something actually good that's not just, oh, this does extra status damage, oh, use this. We need some exotic loot in the game. So again, these were just 5 ideas per hero. Square Enix, please take these ideas. If you want to come to me again for more, I could probably think of a few more. There's a lot of history to draw from. There's really a lot. I mean, I thought of more after I finished making this list. So yeah, there's a lot to do. Fans watching, if you have any ideas for loot, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you're still playing the game, all that down below in the comments. And that's it. I'll see you guys later. Peace.